I call our meeting to order. First item is roll call. Diane?
Mayor Skoog. Vice Mayor Anderson.
Here.
Councilmember Grossman.
I'm here too.
Councilmember Mallory.
Absent.
Oh, absent this evening. That's correct. Marker absent. Councilmember Marshall.
Here.
Councilmember Nye.
Here.
And Councilmember Whiting.
Thank you, Diane.
We have a
Move on to
quorum.
Number 3, discussion regarding Windsong Drive improvements. Norm?
Good evening, Mayor Council. This next item I'm going to talk to you about is the Windsong sidewalk improvements. And if I can I get the overhead, Diane?
Working on it, Norm. It's a lot of buttons.
And this project may look a little familiar to you because we did go through a process, because this was funded with Community Development Block Grant funding. So we did go through a process to basically go through and get this project to race the top for the most viable for funding for the particular grant funds. So Ryan and Judy worked real hard on getting a competitive grant. Keep in mind, we competed for this one, and we were successful getting $300,000 for this particular project. So as you see the project sign, I always like to call out the Community Development Block Grants, and you're looking at the project sign that will be put up here soon for the construction. And as you can see, Dave & Associates did the design. They did a very, very good job on the design. And Asphalt Pavement Supply, a local contractor, was the low bidder. I think Council's seen this before. This is the exhibit we've used for quite a while just to show the limits of the project. There is one little spot we're going to make some continuity of the sidewalk, a couple hundred feet to the south, but basically the project is about 1,300 feet of sidewalk improvements, and that was a particular scope of the project that we started out. One thing I did want to point out to Council was when we first started looking at this project and scoping it, it was really a sidewalk project. You've got the big trip generation of pedestrians in the Viewpoint Apartments getting down to the south, and the Streets Department went out and put a surface out there for a hardened gravel surface with decomposed granite. But that worked pretty good, but it was always everyone's desire to see that enhanced a little bit with concrete. What that brought us with a challenge was I'm sure you're aware too that ultimately the town general plan calls out that's going to be a 5-lane roadway section. So we had to think hard about if we have sidewalk money and we put the sidewalk at the ultimate right-of-way width, what are we going to do about that area in between? So initially what we looked at was we wanted to make sure that we didn't leave that no man's land, because that really wouldn't look right, because their true scope was to get the sidewalk funded. So Gordon and staff went to work and looked hard at what it would cost. So what we ended up come up with, if you see that top exhibit up there, we actually are going to have a ultimate pavement section out there for the ultimate build out. As you can see in the middle there, if I'm explaining it clear enough, that's the existing roadway. As you can see, we had about 20 feet in between that we wanted to make sure we paved. So what we're actually going to end up with out there is in the existing 2-lane road will become 3 lanes plus the sidewalk against the east side fence, which is really what the scope was. What I do like to point out is on a lot of our public works projects, we like to build for connectivity first, and as traffic growth expands and the adjacent businesses develop, we always build for what we call a capacity, the extra lanes. So as you can see, if those two things line up, is that we'll never take a step back. As we get money to build more improvements when they're warranted, either during the traffic rates or adjacent development building, then we never take a step back. And that existing, as you see, the existing 3 lanes now, if you look on the bottom exhibit, ultimately that will be the lanes we're building, that's 3 lanes all on the east side, will become both of the northbound lanes. So you'll have 2-way traffic on the existing lanes in the future when you build the other southbound lanes. So what you do, it makes it real easy for construction. The right-of-way's already been acquired. So just always like to point that out in that we're building the ultimate pavement section, so it'll be seamless when we get more construction dollars to do to growth. So always something, we're always looking at our plans, always following the plans that will ultimately be a 5-lane section in the future. So with that, getting back to the matter you have at hand, we had very good bids. As I said here, when we awarded the last project, Enterprise Parkway, looks like you're seeing double there. We had very, very good bids. In fact, the only difference was it was about $24 on $300,000 bid. That's very, very close. So you can't ask for better bids. I really attribute that to local competition in addition to our long-standing relationship. And of course, you always get good design out of Dave & Associates. The contractors know exactly what what to expect. So I always like to applaud Gordon Bowers' work on the plan quality, because contractors know what to expect. They know what to expect of staff during the construction. So we get this type of competition. So that's what that project costs out there when only $12 away. So we did have good bids in that, or good interest, that we had 8 contractors bid on this job. As you can see, Asphalt Paving Supply is the low bid, and it's well within the particular community development block grant. Other thing I'd like to point out to council is some of the tables for funding. There are some future water and sewer extensions that's going to come out of the water and sewer funds. So obviously when you have new pavement, there could be development on the east side. We don't want to cut the pavement. So it's been determined that we can put some water and sewer service in the future for future developments that's anticipated there. So some funding comes from those sources too. With that, that's the project. Great bids. Looking forward to construction. It'd be staff's recommendation to move forward with awarding this project to Asphalt Paving Supply of Prescott Valley.
Any questions? Marty? Mike?
Yeah, I was just wondering, is there a projection in terms of expansion of that roadway, or is it as monies and opportunities come available?
Well, as we talk about, typically the public dollar builds the particular connectivity. So as dollars become available, it will become with our development impact fees on adjacent development to be their responsibility. So when will the other side be built? Probably when adjacent development builds.
And the same landowner owns both left, or I guess east and west property?
Currently, yes, I understand.
Do you have a question?
No.
If I could comment to that point, and we have worked extensively with the Fain Group on locating driveways on that side, best of their proposed development plans. And of course, that's still up in the air till someone inks on the botted line. But we have put a couple driveway entrances in at their request at locations that will probably work best for their anticipated development.
So you're planning to widen the road. Is there going to be a curb on it or just sidewalk?
Curb too, correct, Mayor. So there'll be a 3-lane section with curb gutter and sidewalk on the east side up against the right-of-way fence.
Any other questions? The group is easy tonight.
Looks easy.
8 years late.
Hold it up any longer.
I'm happy we found a funding source.
I think this is a great project. Thanks, Norm. No more questions? Any more comments, Norm?
None of them are.
Is there an anticipated start time for construction?
Well, with award next week, we would start probably, October 15th, about a 60-day project. I would fully anticipate October, November by Thanksgiving. You'd see substantial, if not full completion by then. So, yeah, pretty quick job. And Asphalt Paving Supply, talked to them here a week ago, and they said, oh, yeah, we're ready to do the job. So you'll see a very speedy construction timeline out there. And very good work done by Asphalt Paving Supply. They do very good work.
You're going to bring this back to us next week?
We will, Mayor, for award.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
That's it. Thank you, Norm. Okay, we move on to number 4, discussion about the proposed transaction privilege tax increase. Bill?
Actually, Mayor, let me go ahead and start this off. But let me point out to you that actually, Mayor and Council, you started off this process 7 years ago. The last time that the town of Prescott Valley has touched its sales tax rate, otherwise known as transactional privilege tax, call it sales tax, that the last time it was touched by the town was in 2002. During the recession, and that's why I say that this process started 7 years ago, is that you have prioritized, as the elected officials of this community, you have prioritized streets and you've prioritized public safety as your 2 biggest concerns that were very much at the top of your list of concerns during the recession as we were pairing revenues with services. And I believe that your direction was well received by staff and followed through. And we were able to go ahead and pair revenues with expenditures. Now, having said that, one of the strategies that was implemented during the recession that was absolutely critical was we cut back on the amount of maintenance on our streets. Okay, normally we would have liked to have been spending $1.5 million to $2 million a year on streets, and quite frankly, we just didn't have it. And so we have a great deal of unmet maintenance needs out in our streets. And similarly, in our public safety department, as you well know, we had a hiring freeze, and we ended up eliminating a number of proactive policing programs and took those officers and put them out in the streets to fill in for what happened when we had our hiring freeze in place. So what I'm saying is that over the last 7 years, in our November retreat and in our January retreat, you, mayor and council, told us, do whatever you can to make sure our streets stay in good shape and that we fight crime. We've done that. But now with the growth in the community, now with a number of years of not exactly up to par maintenance of streets, we are beginning to see some of those effects. And there's a belief that we need to address those. Tonight, what you're looking at is a presentation that started, if you will recall, back in April and May. You ended up hearing from all of your department heads in work studies in the months of April and May, where they told you what their goals for their departments are over the next 5 years. And you saw what those department heads really would like to implement and some of the challenges that they face over the next 5 years. And most of that boiled down to fiscal challenges. Now, taking that and really analyzing what we have to do, what we can do if we increase revenue, we have distilled that down to two critical missions that you have stated repeatedly over 7 years that you want addressed. So tonight, Bill is going to talk to you about the potential impacts if we raised our sales tax from where it sits today at 2.33 to 2.83. In other words, a half a cent increase. What would that do in terms of revenue generation? What would we end up doing with the additional revenue that would generate if you elected to move forward with that? And so with that, you'll hear from Bill talking about the financial picture. You'll hear from Norm talking about what we can do to upgrade street maintenance with additional injection of dollars. And then from the police department, Brian Gerald would love to be here this evening, but he is under the weather and suffering basically from the mud run and a twist and a turn that has created a great deal of pain, and he's trying to get that addressed, but he was absolutely unable to get here because he's having a rough time walking, folks. He did something in the mud run, and in the lower back is what he told me. Or at least he's got James and I convinced that's why he didn't show up. But anyway, with that in mind, I hope that you find the information that's going to be presented to you this evening of interest. And with that, Bill, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Larry. Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. Before I turn it over to Norm and James to talk about how they're going to spend the additional money, what I'd like to do is just kind of give you a background information as to our TPT rates, our collections, and how we compare to the other cities within Arizona. Now, all of you should have a handout. Hopefully it's, I know there's a lot of information on these slides, so hopefully you'll be able to read it. And I have a few extras up here if anyone else is interested in looking at them. But there is quite a bit of information on each of the slides. Now, the first one is TPT rates for cities with a population over 10,000. Now, there's 91 cities in Arizona that have a TPT rate. 47 of them are below 10,000, 44 is above. So I kind of just picked that 10,000 just kind of as a cutoff point because it's almost in the middle. So that's why you see these 44 cities listed here. Right now, you can see in the red, that's what our current rate is. Like Larry said, it's 2.33. In the green is where it's proposed at 2.83. Within these cities listed here at our current rate, there are 20 cities that are above us. So there's 20 cities that have a higher rate than 2.33. But now of the 47 cities that are with a population of under 10,000, there are 35 of those cities currently have a rate higher than 2.5% for their tax or for their TPT. Now, if we go to 2.83 as what's being proposed, you can see we kind of move up the scale, slide a little bit. There's still 11 cities currently still above us that charge a higher rate. And if of the smaller cities, there's 25 of those cities that actually have a rate of 3% or higher. So you can see we kind of right now, we kind of fit in the middle or the lower third if you look at all cities of where we stand. On this scale, you can see the Chandler and Gilbert, they're at 1.8%. And there's, I'll try to talk a little bit about those cities a little bit further on in my presentation. But then you go over at the farther end, you got Chino Valley, San Luis, they're at 4%. So, you know, we're kind of right in the middle at this point. Now, next to each city, you can kind of see there's a little asterisk next to some of the cities. And when you see an asterisk, that means that they actually have a property tax that's used for the general fund or general operations. So it's not anything that had a property tax specifically for debt service, I excluded. So this is just for their normal operations is what this is used for.
Yeah, it's very important, and Bill's got a slide or two coming, that this issue comes up when we deal with the bond rating agencies. They go ahead when they annually or every 2 years, sometimes every 3, they'll go ahead and they check the town's credit worthiness. And one thing that has come up is that we are sole source in terms of revenue. Compared to other cities, we rely most heavily on sales tax. Other cities have a property tax. Other cities have a rental tax, which is huge. There are only 2 cities, or is it 3, in the state of Arizona that have not imposed a rental tax. We are one of those. Okay, a rental tax, according to Bill's last estimate, would generate in excess of $2 million a year if we had a rental tax, but we don't have one, and he's got a slide that will show that.
The other thing I want to point out that this is their, I guess their normal or standard rate. Almost every city in the state has exceptions. So like some cities might charge 2% for a retail sale, but construction is 4%. Or they may charge a higher tax on restaurants or hotels than what they would normally charge to everyone else. So this is what their normal rate is, but there are numerous exceptions to each of the cities that are listed up here. And that also will play into when I get into a little bit more of the other information here. So I'll go next slide. This is total TPT collections for fiscal year 13-14. That's the only information I could find at this point. Right now, all of the year-end financial reports for 15 are just coming out, so that information is not available. This slide, this scale is a little bit skewed because, as you can see, you know, City of Phoenix, they collect $740 million in TPT collections. So then if you go down to Nogales, they're at 10 million. Where we currently are, that little red column there, that's $13.4 million is what we're collecting in the fiscal year 13-14. Now that's the full 2.33. And then if we go ahead with the proposed rate increase, that's that little green column, that goes up to about $16.3 or $4 million. So it's around a $3 million increase in our sales tax revenues. That would be specifically basically dedicated into the general fund to be used for the purposes that of Norm and James are going to be talking about here shortly. So again, I guess the point on this is you can just see the scale of where the cities collect or how much they collect. Now the top 5 cities, they represent about 61% of the total TPT collections of the top 44 cities. So there is a significant amount of money, you know, in the Tucson and the Phoenix and Scottsdale areas. Now, this one shows the cities with a general purpose property tax. Again, I thought it was important. Again, the scale is a little bit skewed because of Phoenix being in here, because right now they collect $145 million in property taxes that they use that actually goes into and supplements their general fund. Now, if you look at Sierra Vista, they're very little. They're at $390,000 for general purpose property tax, which again, it's just added for in a general fund and can be used for any purpose. Now, some of these, I'm sure, or most of these have specific purposes. I'm sure a lot of these have public safety or some other specific reasons. I was not able to find that. Now, of the 44 largest cities, 25 of them, which are listed here, have a property tax. So I think it was important, I think, to present this information because, as we all know, Prescott Valley does not have property tax. And so when you add what the property tax from some of these cities receive on top of their TPT, it really provides them with a little bit more of a financial resource. What I tried to do here is, this is the TPT rates, and I incorporated the general purpose tax on top of it. So the blue is the TPT rates. That orange or whatever color that is basically the property tax that's added on top of their TPT rate. So previously, if you go with our current rate, there were 27, there was 20 cities ahead of us. Now, when you add their TPT or their property tax on top of it, it goes to 27 cities ahead of us. Even at the 2.83%, there are 4 more cities now that are ahead of us when you include their property tax. And the biggest jump is down in Maricopa. Maricopa collects probably 50% of their revenues come from TPT and 50% come from property taxes. Excuse me. So it's a huge, huge difference. So on this one is TPT per capita. And as you can see, I tried to, and I know it's going to be difficult to read, but I tried to put in the population right next to the city. And when we go per capita, you can start seeing the change of where we kind of start moving further back in the order of the top 44. And if you start looking at some of the other cities that are even around us, at this point, Peoria, they're about equal to what we are. But they have a 1.8% TPT rate right now. So they're 0.5% less than us. So then if you look at even Yuma, which is slightly ahead of us, they have a 1.7% TPT rate. So these cities that are close to us, that have fairly large population, they still, their per capita is the same, but their tax rate is a lot less than ours at this point. So that's what brings them down into where we stand with them. Now, if you look at the green, which is what the proposed 2.83 tax rate would be, we would go from our current $327 per capita to $398 per capita. But when you compare Prescott to Prescott, they're $700 per capita. You look at if you look at Cottonwood, they're almost $1,000 per capita. Some of the reasons for that, and it's not the same for all of them, but some of the reasons, especially up like Show Low, which is very high per capita, Sedona, is tourism. Tourism brings in, a lot of people go into those areas. They spend a lot of money, and as a result, all of that influx of new money into that area really helps those communities. Some of the other areas, they have a significantly larger retail tax base than us. Excuse me. And like the Chandlers, or even the biggest one is Scottsdale. Scottsdale would be a combination of retail, large retail, commercial leases, and then tourism, obviously, and then hotels. Hotels is also a big component, because cities charge a different rate for hotels than they do for retail services and things like that. So as you can go through, you can start seeing some of the cities where it's very apparent that they have a large tourism, or even like Prescott. Prescott has, approximately 1,000 more hotel rooms than we do. So that's significant for their base. They have a larger retail base than we do. They have the rental and commercial lease tax that we don't have. So that's why a lot of this information, you can see where we stand when you start looking at per capita versus other cities. And then the last one is when I started including the property taxes. I thought it's still important on a per capita basis. Again, as a result, more cities start jumping ahead of us. If we start looking at where we are per capita versus where some of the other cities are because of that property tax being included. So we were, on a previous slide, the current tax, we were about 17th out of 44. Now we're 11th from the bottom out of 44. So, and where we're proposed wasn't that as much of a difference. Right now we're at 22 versus of the 44 cities, so we're right in the middle at this point when you include the property taxes. So with that, I'll answer any questions or comments that the council might have.
Question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, do we have any limitations in terms of state or otherwise relative to how we handle our TPT? So we have that sole decision discretion.
Right.
Okay.
In the past, the .33 was always was somewhat dedicated for, the three or four main streets. So that money is specifically set aside for those streets. But other than that, there is no dedication.
Laura?
Is this tax being proposed in perpetuity?
I believe so.
It is.
Then I'll have a lot of questions later on.
Okay. The point of that, Councilwoman, is that there is no sunset on the need for additional services such as response time in public safety and things like that. And so to sunset it would be doing a disservice to those services we plan to restore that existed prior to the recession, meaning like some of our drug education at the high school level, middle school level, and things like that. And so that's why it's not looked to be sunsetted. That's why the information that Bill just presented would go ahead and clearly show that the revenue per capita in Prescott Valley is significantly less than other communities our own size when you take in their entire revenue stream. The other thing that's important to point out is during our largest budget, which was in 2007, the town of Prescott Valley had revenues of $111 million. Today, our budget this year is $72 million. Okay, so we are providing services at not much of a diminished amount, with the exception, notable exception, of street maintenance and street construction. But what it is we're still functioning at a dramatically diminished revenue stream compared to what we had in 2007.
All right, any more questions, Laura?
I'm going to be very careful because I have to think a lot about this, but I know from experience in other communities that they run into issues out in the future, and you can't know what those issues are. And so it's very hard for me to ask particular questions. But anything that's revenue generating or uses it as these two highly important entities, the amounts out in the future that they require vary. And we don't have any mechanism at this point to allow for that. So I'll address that a little later on when I hear a little more.
Ready?
Yeah, this afternoon I received a phone call from somebody asking me to suggest that we either reduce or eliminate sales tax on food, which just got me to thinking. I don't know what the sales tax rate is on food. I wish Mary was here. But I went to the Arizona Department of Revenue website after I had Googled the search for tax-exempt items in Arizona. And food for home consumption is listed as being non-taxable. So I don't know whether we charge tax or not, but I know for a lot of our community, I mean, yeah, you got to buy food, and it'll affect their pocketbook. I don't want to stir up anything too disastrous because it's important that we have our roads and police funded. I'm not against that. I'm not against the raising of the sales tax for that. But the question came up, and I did some research. So if you have an answer, I'd really like to hear it.
Sure. The state of Arizona does not charge a tax rate for food. I would have to look, but I think every city in Arizona does. So that is one of the exceptions. So. And there are, and I mean, this is where this simplification of the tax code was coming in. They wanted to try to get everyone kind of in the same boat, per se. But right now, cities do. So, and that is a significant revenue stream for the town. Significant.
Yeah, if you'll remember, during the middle of the recession, the city of Phoenix, which does not, as a rule, charge a tax on food, and they went ahead and they implemented a 1-cent tax on food sales in the city of Phoenix to bail them out and save significant amounts of service, including police, during the recession. They ended up having, or maybe they added a 1 cent to their already existing food taxation. But to Bill's point, most cities and towns in the state of Arizona do have a tax on groceries.
And if I add the quarterly report that my staff provides to council, it's broken down on there for the last 5 years, how much money we've taken in on an annual basis in food. And like I said, it's in years ago, it used to be construction was our large number. Right now, food is part of the retail. Food is a very large number for us from a revenue perspective.
Okay, because I know doing some additional research, it also said that it mostly applies to food that would be normally accepted under food stamp program. If it's not offered as a food,
anything.
If it's offered as a food stamp item, then it shouldn't be taxable, and other items can be exempted and
right.
Charge
there is
tax
a lot
on
of those exemptions and that in place. But if you would go to one of the grocery stores here and you bought some milk.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping Mary was going to be here tonight.
Yeah,
so.
Milk, it would be taxable.
Yeah. So if we were to reduce or eliminate, it would be a significant hit to our tax base.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Stephen?
I'm just wondering if this is something we're voting on or if the public's voting on. Because when I was running for council, I told the people point blank that I wasn't going to vote for a new tax, and I can't go back on my word. So, I mean, is this something that they're going to vote for or us?
Well, you have that option. Council definitely has the option to vote on it.
Because I see the
legal
need for it.
perspective, I would have to defer to Ivan for any further information. But you do have that authority as a council to increase the tax rate without going for a vote.
When previous TPT adjustments were made, the mayor and town council of Prescott Valley made those adjustments. Okay, and per state law, and Ivan can go ahead and tell you what that says. It used to be that you didn't have a choice to take it out, and council had to make the adjustments. Now, because of a change in law, you can make the adjustments or you can take it to the voters. And some would argue that the job of elected officials is to go ahead and make sure that we take care of those critical things that are here in front of us. And then the other side of that coin is some would say go ahead and put it up on the ballot. When we made the adjustment to add .33 in 2002, it was done by the mayor and council.
Rick?
Well, I too, since I buy groceries and things in this town, don't want to pay more money. And I'm not anxious to raise taxes. But I do feel it's our responsibility as the town council to make sure that we don't have potholes in our road and that we have police that can respond to our calls when we need them. There's two parts to public safety that I think we have to keep in mind. One is the fact that our police officers are serving the public. The other part is that the police officers themselves are safe in doing their jobs. And when there aren't enough police officers doing the job, they are not safe. It's our responsibility to make sure that we do provide that service. We're here, we're elected to do that job. We are responsible, we need to do that job. One way or another, we're responsible to do it.
Would you like to hear?
Laura?
I totally agree with everything Rick just said. And based on that, do you have any more to present? If not, I'd really like to hear the public safety presentation.
We were going to lay out the street program, and then public safety is the last presentation. So if we could have Norm come up and do that. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Council. What I'm going to do is go in depth about the status of the pavement maintenance here in Prescott Valley. So I've got quite a few slides. What I want to do is walk you all the way through at the condition, historically where it's been, where we've been in a great recession with loss of revenue in order to maintain our streets, what we did spend, and then talk about what we're doing nationally about where street maintenance is and what other communities are doing to benchmark against what other communities are doing. Every community obviously has roadways, and it's really been government's job in order to maintain all the roadways within the communities across the nation, whether it be the interstate system down to local government. So government does this job very well, and we do have our revenue sources to do that. But I think what's important always to mention in that those revenue streams are important to continue to maintain. I always like to show this slide. I show this at the Citizens Academy, but I always talk about our buckets of money. And with street maintenance and street construction, there are different pots of money and buckets of money. I think the first one that really your street maintenance come on, and I'll focus most on in my presentation, is the HERF revenue, the Highway User Fund. But I'd be remiss not to mention some of the other funds that we use to maintain roads and or actually build roads, because expansion is part of it. Obviously, what expansion does when you build a new road, it gets you a good amount of years of service of that investment that you don't have to maintain that particular road, but you do have to put it in your inventory. So you always got to be mindful of inventory you put in. You've got to have those operational dollars keep up with added infrastructure and lane miles of road. So as it's been mentioned, the 1/3 cent sales tax was implemented at 0.33 in 2002, and that does go to building new roadways. We spend it every year with expansion. Good example of some of the projects this year, the Lakeshore widening, that's the funding source for that particular project. It's actually out for bid right now in order to widen those lanes and improve that particular. So that's capital. Of course, development impact fees, that's what the new housing pays. That's for new construction. Of course, the developers pay within their particular subdivision, but of course they have to pay for some of the capacity improvements. Flood control is probably one of the other ones that's not particularly involved with street maintenance, but we have done a few projects in the last years that we were able to replace the pavement new with some of the underground storm pipes that we've had to put into the street. So that's a nice funding source to, while the pavement was old, you would replace and improve the stormwater management, you get the pavement upgraded, and funding has gone to that. The last one that's probably one of the biggest misnomers is federal and ADOT. I'd like to talk about them a little bit because they do maintain roads, but I'd like to talk to you about the funding, whether or not it ever trickles down to local governments, and they keep a lot of it themselves. There we go. I don't know what happened there, but let's talk about federal ADOT. Then we'll come back to the HERF funding. Council's probably well aware that in 2009, when the recession hit and there was the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, it was the national construction effort by when President Obama got in office that he wanted to jumpstart jobs and provide jobs. And that was in 2009. Probably well aware that that was $1.5 million that we realized a windfall here in Prescott Valley of, you may recall, Glassford Hill Road was completed with that $1.5 million. That was a nice shot in the arm, but that was one time only. Haven't had any opportunity since. And if you look on the project sign, I always like to point out, you don't see a Prescott Valley logo on there. This was regional money that came to the region. And I still remember the day that we were all vying for projects. We thought we were getting in the neighborhood of $20 to $50 million. Well, the whole region got $1.5 million. Glassford Hill was the only one that fit that bill. It was a good project, no doubt. But keep in mind, that was regional money. It's not just Prescott Valley. But the end result was very nice to have $1.5 million into our particular roadway system. This one's probably most pertinent, is that you see on the sign this was done in 2009. I'm going to focus tonight on really, you need to get on a 5-year maintenance cycle to maintain your pavements, what's recommended. I have a few more slides later, but as you see, Glassford Hill Road is our biggest carrying road. And of course, last week, I think everyone's aware, we did a particular rehabilitation of it with a rejuvenating oil. So it's actually a 6-year maintenance cycle, but it was time. It's starting to show a little bit of fatigue. When it was new in 2009, and then you start seeing the fatigue, the wear, and some more cracking. Like, it's time to maintain it. That's why we went through and spent money last week to maintain that 3.2 miles of Glassford. Another revenue source, obviously there's grants available out there, but as meager as they are, you may recall the Enterprise Parkway. That was competitive. Arizona Commerce Authority grant, $500,000. Built new roadway. That helps our particular roadway network, but one-time shot-in-your-arm construction, that was competitive. I do want to go back. Remember the bucket of money, that road maintenance. Talking about the buckets of money is really only for construction and expansion. It has to go for expansion capabilities. Let's get back to maintenance. That bucket of money, that's for maintenance. That's what the HERF revenue covers. And I've pointed out in presentations before, HERF revenue from the state has been 18 cents a gallon since 1993. If it was benchmarked just to inflation, that should be 41 cents today. So back in 93, basically you almost had twice the buying power back then. The revenue has never been enhanced. We've actually increased lane miles of roadways and the same amount collected at the pump. Gas has been all over the place, the cost per gallon. It's been up to $4 a gallon, and I think it's down to, $2.50? It's kind of all over the board. But once again, that amount that the state charges per gallon hasn't changed, and not near as much buying power today as it was in 93. Gone over that with council in the past. This next slide does show, this is from the American Petroleum Institute, that really shows what Arizona collects. And if you see, there's just a synopsis of the particular, Arizona collects 37 cents. The Fed rate is 18 cents, and the state rate's 18 cents. And then there's one more other tax, so it's 37 cents. So just want to show how Arizona compares to other states. When we talk about revenue they have statewide they bring in. Important thing to bring to your attention is, I'm sure council's aware, this is the revenue gained from the pump, and that's to go for roadway maintenance. Keep in mind, with a lot of the downturn, they still haven't restored funding that has been taken for the DPS, significant funding. So the money, actually more money comes out of this before it actually comes back for roadway maintenance. As dwindling as it can be, this year, again, they've got $140 million aversion. We've talked in the past before about revenue collection at the pump. Greater fuel efficiency of 30 to 40 miles per gallon hurts that particular amount that you gain. Good news for the environment, but you don't collect as much revenue. Likewise, electric cars. Everyone's still grappling with, they don't pay any fuel tax at the gas pump with electric cars. Getting me more and more on the road. We're losing our revenue source.
Hitting the panic button, don't you?
And that was happening earlier, Norm. It was flipping back. Your staff person was here.
I don't think our handheld clicker is working as well, so we'll just do it by hand. This map, let's talk about the fate of pavement maintenance here in Prescott Valley. Council sees this every particular year. We talk about our chip seal maintenance and the expenditure. We've all seen this before. This is a 10-year maintenance cycle. As I've talked about, we look for a 5-year maintenance cycle that's recommended. So you've seen the multicolors. That's what leads us into the last ones that get done first or come up to the top of the list. So council's seen this before, but I'll talk more about this particular map later. Let's talk about where we've been the last 10 years in expenditure for street maintenance. As you can see from the graph here, started back in 06, 07, and of course, this year's chip seal program for maintenance was just over $1 million. Very significant this year. As we're well aware, the recession started in October of 07, and as you can see from the particular graph, when we do chip seals in July, we got in our big chip seal project for the funding that year before, of course, we had the rug pulled out from under us and for funding, and we had, of course, the revenue declines. So that 07, 08 is probably a little misnomer. That was in the budget. We spent it in July. Of course, everything crashed starting in October. So as you can see, the 5 years of the economic recession, we're allowed to call it, everyone had to make cuts. And as you can see, significant reductions in the amount of spent. Do like to point out, too, we talked about chip seal maintenance. Overlay is another maintenance treatment that we have been doing here in Prescott Valley to help maintain longer lives for our pavements. So we add those two together, and you can see total expenditure. What's probably most important to show is that gold line you see up on top, that 1.5 million, with our current street maintenance program, that's really the number we need to have to maintain our streets on a 5-year cycle. That's recommended by all of the technical manuals, and I'll go into more detail there. So really, as you can see, we've never really hit that 1.5 million mark that we need to maintain our 5-year maintenance cycle. You can see we've gotten close in a few years, but we've always fallen behind. I might add in 06, 07, that's when you had the big subdivision explosion. We probably were spending enough money back then, because keep in mind we had a lot more lane miles. So the amount of expenditure back in 06, 07 was getting closer to being adequate. But of course, we've had a lot more lane miles during that particular time, and we haven't caught up with more maintenance for the more lane miles, more dollars towards the lane miles. So this is what we've historically had over the years, but keep that 1.5 million, that gold bar in the back of your mind. Let's talk about 5-year pavement cycle. What happens if you don't maintain a 5-year pavement cycle? This next slide I'm going to spend a little bit of time on, because this is what all of the particular FHWA, all your technical manuals, all the research people, nationwide, they look at pavement wear, all types of pavement wear across the nation, small cities, highways, and the like. This is what the experts that have their doctorates and spend research dollars, this is technical manuals about what they recommend. If you see the graph up there, what I want to explain to you is, you see alternative A is a brand new pavement at year 0. What it shows you, if you don't do anything to the pavement, it really is in pretty good shape for the first 5 years. But if you don't do any routine maintenance to it, it basically really starts to degrade at year 10. It really falls off, as you see. As a matter of fact, as you see year 15, it's basically a just horrible service level. So it's important. All this research, what it points out to, is you can see that what the recommendations from the experts is you do a surface treatment. A pavement degrades due to sun and wear on the surface. If you keep that surface maintained, then that pavement structure is good for a long time. That's really adequate maintenance, and that's what the science has told us from all the studies they do, looking at the billions of dollars spent every year on pavement maintenance. This is the best way to maintain pavements. So as you can see, what the recommendation of the experts is, the dotted line, which is the alternative B, they recommend a chip seal every 5 years. So as you look at that horizon at year 15, you can see that basically when you do a chip seal every 5 years, if you did nothing after 15 years, your pavement's done. It's just horrible condition. If you do a chip seal every 5 years, you do 3 chip seals in that same 15 years. But why does that make good sense? Because of the cost involved with a chip seal if you do your adequate maintenance at the intervals I recommend. A chip seal cost is about $1.75 a square yard. You do that 3 times, you're about $5.25 per square yard to maintain your payments to be at that same point in year 15. If you don't do your chip seal maintenance, you're looking at what's called a total rehab, which is basically grinding up the new pavement or the old pavement. It's called a mill and fill, and placing back that particular pavement if you didn't maintain the service. Then you still have to put a chip seal on it for a good wear surface. So it's always recommended. Look at the cost. You're basically comparing $5.25 versus a mill and fill if you do nothing at $17. What's that telling you? You spend about a third if you do your routine maintenance and what you would. If you're going to stay in the pavement game, if you don't do it after 5 years, you lose that whole value. You got to maintain that value. Do your routine maintenance. And as I mentioned, this is the FHWA life cycle. Of course, this comes out of a 300-page technical document. It all boils down to the simplicity of chip seal maintenance every 5 years. Here's just an example of the particular Prescott Valley system. We have 241 centerline miles of road. And what we can look at, what's the value of that particular investment you have out there. In 15 years, if you don't do any chip seal maintenance, you're looking at a $58 million investment you have to do to get your pavements to adequate service level. Obviously, with a chip seal done every 3 years, you're only looking at $22 million. If you do your chip seals at your intervals that you're talking about, there's the investment you need to make, and look at the substantial savings you have if you maintain what you got and find that funding to do the chip seal every 5 years. Let's talk about what Arizona is doing at the state level. This is a presentation that I've seen in the last 6 months about the, as you can see, the Arizona Chamber of Commerce. They've recognized the need for increased funding across the state for pavement. And this particular presentation was what they presented to us. Keep in mind, this is the Arizona Chamber of Commerce. One of the slides they show is, in this presentation, as you can see, a map of the United States. You can see states that are in red are the ones that have passed legislation. And then there's 15 more that we're considering raising the gas tax. As you can see there, Arizona isn't one of them. Where does that revenue come in? The state of Arizona has not talked about, as a legislature, to generate more revenue for any type of different revenue source, whether it be raising the excise tax that they currently have. Remember we talked about that 16 or 18 cents they had? Hasn't been raised. They haven't talked about it in any legislative session. So Arizona isn't doing much when you can see many other states have and have implemented increase in revenues. Here's something from the Associated Press that I found in one of the transportation journals that, as you can see, Associated Press reports in 2015, 1/3 of all states have approved measures to raise funds for transportation. And that same Associated Press reports that 1/2 of all states have passed transportation funding measures since 2001-3. Half the states are really aggressively pursuing increased revenue in order to maintain their streets statewide, but they're doing it at the state level. Here's a comparison of, we talked about the states that have raised fees. This is the most recent July 1st listing of what states charge. As you see highlighted in yellow, there is Arizona ranking number 3 of what their particular rate of tax is in order to maintain roads. At 37 cents, you see it ranks number 43. You see the U.S. average there at 48 cents. Arizona 11 cents under the U.S. average for what they collect in revenues in order to maintain their pavements across the state. And of course, that's the trickle-down effect of particularly that trickles down to local governments. This slide really points to also of what's happening of where people are at or not people, where states are at across the nation of their tax rate. As you can see, the yellow talks about the tax rate that's under 40 cents. Of course, Arizona's at 37 cents. You can see all those states listed there that don't have that particular revenue source, and the other states that have more revenue in order to maintain their roads. What's important to point out, if you contrast this with the other slide, the other states that have taken measures to increase have been New Mexico and Texas. The only 3 that haven't is Alabama, Oklahoma, and Arizona. Everybody else is taking measures to increase their revenue source to maintain roads. So what can we do to increase pavement maintenance? Obviously, we need more money to maintain that particular level of maintenance. This particular chart demonstrates that if the town of Prescott Valley wants to make an investment to maintain that particular service level of a chip seal every 5 years to maintain that service life so it doesn't get to that significant drop-off we talked about at year 10 to 15, we've run all the numbers of the town-wide 250 or 241 lane miles. And what we've determined is chip seal could be performed to catch up. We're on a 10-year program. In order to catch up, we would need $2 million of revenue the next 4 years, as indicated there, in order to catch up back to a 5-year program. We've run lots of spreadsheets, spent about a week running them, and that's what the synopsis is. Talked about the gold bar that we want to look at. Keep in mind, the 241 lane miles or centerline miles of roads in Prescott Valley, we need $1.5 million to keep it on a 5-year program. So once we reach with $2 million of revenue over the next 4 years, we could reach, as you can see in year 5 in 2021, and then the $1.5 million would sustain that 5-year cycle. So the other thing I want to point out, you can see that we relieve a residual in year 5. Other thing I pointed out in other studies that was submitted to council was that we haven't done any overlays. If you recall that other slide, we haven't done any overlays. This is just strictly chip seal maintenance. It'd be staff's recommendation that in year 5 you start looking at some of the other pavements that need the particular overlays for pavement structure because of breakdown in maintenance. The next few slides is where we've crunched all the numbers in order to be able to provide this plan to substantiate that extra $2 million. I'm going to flip through these pretty fast, but as you can see, this would be year 1. You're seeing with a $2 million infusion, those would be the roads. You can see the 10-year different colors there. Every year we gain 2 years off of getting towards that 5-year particular breakdown. See, year 2, 2 more years come off, you get a little closer. Once again, a $2 million expenditure, even more roads, you're down to basically a 7-year cycle. Year 3, 3 more years come off, you're down to a cycle, as you see there, getting closer to that 5-year cycle. And this particularly is, if I'm catching up with my slides, this should be year 4. As you can see, you're back to where we were this year, back to a 5-year cycle of $2 million, and that would take care of the 5-year cycle. This is a synopsis of the map, so you can see the legend at the side. This is townwide, all the streets we maintain. We always like to make sure we touch all the streets, but this is what the Public Works Department could deliver for a chip seal program with $2 million of a new funding source. In order, you can see the roads that will be done. As you can see, when you get to year 5, all the roads would be chip sealed. Only 5 years, that particular rotation would be sustained at $1.5 million a year, sustained funding for maintenance. As I mentioned, any residual funding, we need to start looking at the particular restoration funds too for overlays. I guess in conclusion, if you want to maintain adequate pavement service levels for transportation of people and services in Prescott Valley, you need to have an adequate funding to perform chip seal maintenance on a 5-year interval. If we don't, we're going to always continue to have degradation of payments and lose that big capital investment, which all of the technical periodicals say, you lose that capital investment, you've really lost a lot of value. At this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions about what I've presented.
It's a curiosity question, Norm. You had a lot of slides about what Arizona does and doesn't do. How does that apply to this council? What did you want us to get from that? Just general knowledge of where we at with the tax structure compared to other states? I'm unsure why you had so much about the state issues in there.
What's important across the nation, it's a very good question. The reason I covered so much there, across the nation there's a great movement, as I point out. Half the states in the last 2 years have come up with adequate funding in order to tax at the state level and pass that through all the way down to local governments. State of Arizona, the reason I wanted to show that, hasn't. We're ranked number 43 in not only the amount of revenue they collect, but they're not making any strides in order to collect that revenue. If we're going to here in Prescott Valley have a revenue source in order to do that, it's not going to come from the state. They have no activity at the legislature. But there's activity all across the nation. So this is not particularly Norm Davis coming through and said, hey, I'd really like more money for my roads. It's a nationwide trend, is that this is across the nation, and there is being action taken at most states in order to increase that revenue to bring that pavement. So it's not just Prescott Valley that's behind in the maintenance curve of the roadways. It's a national trend.
Other questions? Mike? No? Steve? I was watching all that stuff, but kind of wondering, hoping that we would also have a plan for some upgrades. We've got a lot of old chip seal roads, and some of them are getting pretty rough on the edges and stuff. Is there any plans on upgrading?
Well, yes, we do some upgrade every year, Mayor, but this particular focus here was to just maintain some of the newer subdivision roads and keep that existing service. But you're right, in year 5, it'd be my recommendation, that's where you need to do some edge patching and dedicate some funding to the upgrades. That's what we talked about, the overlays. To your point, that would be, some of our, in the core of the town, some of that chip and the roadway edges break in and the roads get narrow. We do have a certain amount of funding go towards that maintenance every year, but it's still not enough to maintain that adequate pavement width that breaks off. So it's a good point. Yes, in year 5 we could be looking at, or what the council would desire, to start putting funding towards even some of the overlays or some of the edge pavement, more funding towards that, towards maintenance.
I think you got to give your crew credit where they have run that new edges on those roads. They've done a good job, especially lately, the last few months.
Thank you, Mayor. And as you noticed, with the funding we've had in the past years, we're really only able to do that on some of the major arterials. So as always, we take good care and best care of our highest traveled roads, but to the point we don't get to all the roads, so some of the smaller, less minor roads don't get that particular edge rehabilitation like the main routes do. So every chip seal year we get that question from the public. How come you did road this? And I say, well, it's got more traffic. Does that make sense rather than your road? And I say, well, yeah, if you're out of money, do the roads that have the most traffic, but it never has that trickle-down effect. And that's a point to make up, too, is you look around and says, well, geez, looks like a lot of we do have funding, but what it does do is we take care of our most heavily traveled roads. Glassford looks in great shape. Well, once again, Glassford in great shape, the Robert Roads and the Navajos with newer pavement, but once again, you start running short on money and you have to cut it short. What do we pick? The roads with less traffic volume on it, and they do start to suffer.
No other questions? I think we'll have to find out what Bill's planning, how much is going to go to roads, how much is going to go to police. And I think the chief wants to tell us how much he'd like.
Yes, and Mr. Mayor, the numbers that we've talked about and the 5-year plan that has been looked at is that 2/3 of the increased number of dollars, which is roughly $3 million a year, that $2 million would end up going to street infrastructure, and that you would end up having about $750 going to public safety, and then the remainder would be for other departments to go ahead and take the pressure off of them. But the lion's share of this is street maintenance. And to your point, not only is it purely maintenance, but there has to be some rebuilding and planing on some other roads, and that all will end up being determined year by year. But to Norm's point, and I think he did a great job in his presentation, to go ahead and show how delaying any of that maintenance really becomes problematic.
Good. Chief, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Assistant with you?
Yes.
Good. She runs a computer and you do the task.
She's the Chief Executive Officer of the Police Department, really.
Good.
Mayor and Council, thank you for this opportunity to communicate with you and our community about what we would do to restore and provide new services to our citizens, given the additional funds we might expect from this tax increase. As the town continues to grow at almost exponential rates, it is important to ensure that town services grow as well, so that we are best positioned to meet the needs of our residents and businesses. In June, Chief Gerald presented the Police Department's 5-year plan, which detailed where we need to be by the year 2020. The items that will be discussed today are all included in that plan. However, with the budgetary increase being considered, we will be able to implement parts of the 5-year plan much sooner and thereby significantly improve the service that we provide to our community. The relative safety of our community has led several organizations to rate Prescott Valley as one of the best places to live in Arizona. In order to maintain the desirability of our community as a safe place to live, work, and play, we have 2 main goals which would require the support of our community and town government to attain. These include to improve public safety, or said another way, the safety of the public, and to enhance transparency and accountability. I would like to start by providing an historical perspective on what occurred during the period that began just before the Great Recession in 2007 up until today. Despite the recent addition of more than 11 positions, our overall budget today is almost 21% lower than in 2007. In 2007, it was $12,015,945, and today it is $9,748,918. During the same time period, we saw a 9% reduction in workforce through attrition. In 2007, we had a total of 86 employees, compared to 78 employees in 2014. During that same time, our population increased by almost 22%. In 2007, the population was 35,740, and today it is 44,500. Due to increases in population, the amount of police activity, and the severity of the crimes we are experiencing has been increasing. As an example, we've seen a 30% increase in Part 1 crime. And although we've seen an overall decline in Part 2 crimes of about 11%, assaults and domestic violence are up 26%. Arrests are up as well as our overall activity levels. For arrests, we are on pace to have another 8% increase this year. Over the last 5 years, we've seen our response times to calls for service go up by more than 30 seconds. In other words, it takes us about 10% longer to get there when we are responding to priority traffic. It's interesting also to note that in 2007, our officers were writing the addresses down that they were dispatched to on a pad of paper and then pulling out a map and trying to find out where they were going if they didn't happen to know the exact location that they were responding to and how to get there from where they were to get to where they needed to go. Today, we have mobile data terminals in the car. I do believe that that has provided some compensation because those mobile data terminals provide our officers with information and essentially a path to get right to the call. This has resulted in a necessity to shift our attention away from some of the proactive efforts we have made in the past. The greatest reduction in services has been our community outreach efforts and traffic safety, as you will see next. In 2007, we ran 2 Citizens Academy. Today, none. And in fact, we haven't run any since 2010. In 2007, the DARE program was active in 5 of our elementary schools, and today, none. In 2007, we had 3 school resource officers. Today, we have 1. Other prevention and education efforts like Cops and Bobbers, where children and police spend the morning fishing at Fane Park, have been reduced as well from for 1 event per year to none. Bicycle rodeos, where trained officers teach kids about bicycle safety, the importance of safety equipment, and we even provide some of this equipment, such as helmets, free of charge with the assistance of our local businesses, have been reduced or eliminated. In 2007, we were doing 5 per year, and in 2014, we did 1. Even more concerning still, in 2007, we had 184 individual block watches. Today, that number has dwindled to 15. These reductions were the unfortunate byproduct of a reduction in resources and the need of our department to refocus our efforts on the basic mission of responding to calls for service, traffic accidents, and completing investigations following up on those initial calls. The key word here is responding. Our proactive efforts have been significantly reduced. In 2007, our traffic section was staffed by 4 officers. Today, we don't have anyone assigned specifically to traffic. Over the same period, drug recognition experts, or DREs and phlebotomists, were reduced from 18 down to 9. Drug recognition experts are specially trained to identify drug-impaired drivers, and phlebotomists are individual officers certified to draw blood to reduce the need to transport impaired drivers to the hospital to obtain evidence. Since 2007, we have seen an increase of 83% in accidents. There were 337 in 2007 as compared to 615 in 2014. What is interesting is that in 2007, we issued 6,919 traffic citations, warnings, and repair orders compared to 9,617 in 2014, a 39% increase. And you have seen that despite that additional effort on the part of our patrol officers to make more traffic contacts and enforce the laws, the rate of accidents has still increased in Prescott Valley. Other things that have contributed to the increase in the number of traffic accidents include the elimination of photo enforcement, the increase in the number of cars on the road, and just the plain old increase in population. Also, the lack of available staff or dedicated assignment to the traffic section has been a challenge. One thing to note is that this year we have experienced a 30% increase over the same time period in 2014 in injury-related collisions. Impaired driver enforcement has unfortunately suffered as well. As shown, we had 308 DUI arrests in 2007, compared to 183 in 2014. This reduction indicates our personnel have less time to proactively pursue impaired drivers. National studies indicate that alcohol-impaired driving is decreasing. However, drug-impaired driving is on the rise. As noted before, unfortunately, the number of drug recognition experts and phlebotomists we would need to specifically deploy in order to combat the increase in drug-impaired driving has been reduced over the last several years. We are also experiencing some challenges in the area of technology. For example, mobile data terminals. Our fleet of patrol vehicles is outfitted with computers that have reached or exceeded their life expectancy and are still operating on outdated 3G data feeds. Digital evidence storage. Our evidence section processes thousands of digital images and videos each year. This current year, we've subscribed to evidence.com to help deal with the high volume of digital evidence we receive. Records. Our records section utilizes software to manage data, and that software currently does not allow us to efficiently and timely retrieve the data we need to deploy our resources without causing significant staffing challenges, which also tends to render the information stale by the time we get it. Additionally, personnel accountability. We are tracking data related to use of force, pursuits, injuries, and complaints manually. And one of the largest recommendations that's come out of some of the recent national studies are that police departments need to be very conscious of those specific types of incidents. In spite of these challenges, we have made some progress, a lot of progress. Our personnel have aggressively pursued grant funding to improve certain services to make an effort to maintain other services during the recession. To that end, we have obtained $4,047,340 in grants. Some of the items paid for with this grant money were our family violence unit, pay for officers to pursue impaired drivers from the Governor's Office of Highway Safety, as well as radar units and other equipment for our patrol vehicles. Some of the other sources of grant funding that are listed here are the Department of Justice, the Arizona Community Foundation, and the Department of Homeland Security. We've also received over $110,000 in donations from the Prescott Valley Police Foundation for officer safety equipment. We've increased our training budget by 270% since 2012 to ensure our staff, both civilian and sworn, are properly prepared to carry out their responsibility. Although we've had successes during these challenging times, given additional funding, we are committed to the return of many services that will significantly improve safety and increase transparency and accountability within the department. First, we will properly staff our traffic section. We currently have no one solely dedicated to our traffic section, and even though there's been a concerted effort that we spoke of earlier by our patrol officers to enforce the traffic laws, the fact is that many times they are simply too busy responding to calls for service. Our goal would be to assign 8 officers to the traffic section by April or May of 2017. These officers will perform traffic enforcement, crash investigation, impaired driver investigation, relieving our patrol officers from these tasks and allowing them to provide direct service in a patrol fashion. Our agency will be better equipped and staffed to improve our crime prevention efforts in the community. Our Support Services Division will coordinate a robust Citizens Academy where our residents can learn about the police department and participate in hands-on activities designed to educate our community about the realities of policing. Our patrol squads will engage with our block watches in their districts. Our community services officers will coordinate our presence at community events, and events like Cops and Bobbers will bring our community and our officers together for a stronger relationship. A recent example illustrates the importance of these kinds of events. Detective Sergeant Rob Brown and Detective Danny Owen recently spoke with members of the Shriners Club about how to prevent and or discover if you were the victim of identity theft. Within 2 days of the presentation, 2 members of the club called Sergeant Brown to let him know that they had in fact discovered they'd been victims of identity theft and had since taken additional measures that were provided to them by our personnel to protect themselves from future attacks. There are some new services that we'll be providing. We will purchase computer software and hardware and provide training to certify our investigators so they're able to examine and preserve evidence on items like cell phones and computers. Currently, crime victims wait more than a year because of the backlog of evidence of this type being examined at the state level. With this digital forensics program, we will be able to pull the evidence in a couple days, and that will allow us to put a suspect behind bars quicker and serve the victim in a more timely manner. We will purchase software for use by our professional standards section that will allow us to better track those incidents that can be a predictor of potential problems with an employee, which will allow for early intervention and hopefully save an employee's career. We will implement on-body cameras for all officers who work the street, providing a level of transparency that our community expects. We will begin addressing community problems with a dedicated squad of officers who will direct their efforts toward the suppression, prevention, and apprehension of criminals. These officers will be deployed in cars, on bicycles, and on foot, depending on the need. And finally, in our efforts to remain compliant with state records retention laws, we will work through a backlog of several years of criminal cases requiring examination, retention, and disposal. So, in summary, the proposed budgetary increase will allow us to accelerate our 5-year plan significantly. We will be able to dedicate officers to our traffic section to be able to give attention to any problem area in the town, investigate accidents, address citizen complaints received from our citizens, and conduct alcohol enforcement patrols. We will assign another detective to criminal investigations to cut down on the time it takes to bring a case to closure. We will implement a problem-solving unit that will be dedicated to working problem areas within the town. We will purchase body-worn cameras for transparency. We will become more up-to-date regarding technology. We will reestablish community outreach programs such as our Block Watch and neighborhood association groups. And we will implement our new business liaison program. And in the end, this translates into increased service to our customers, a more trusting and transparent relationship with the community, vastly improved traffic safety, a return to proactive efforts by the entire department, and improved response times from our patrol officers, which over the last 5 years has increased by 30 seconds. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Questions, anyone? Laura?
Obviously, you're going to have additional officers to implement this plan. What does your plan look like now? How many in the first year? How many in the second year? Have you gone that far?
So we've looked
that
at
this funding will provide that for.
Yes, what we believe is that we can do in addition to what we might expect without any sales tax increase as far as growth, an additional 6 positions, as well as the purchase of the items and software that we have discussed.
Let's get comments, because this is a pretty big deal. Marty, you got any comment?
No, I think some of the numbers are sort of scary in a way with the before and after and what's needed. I think it's important, and any way that we could assist to get to those numbers without overburdening our budget, I think will be positive for everybody. It's a win-win. So, it's going to be interesting to see how all of this turns out and where it goes.
Well, leading up to this, I had just so many concerns. So I started asking our citizens about this, and I had a wonderful reaction. I don't remember how many asked, so I don't want to give you a number. Nobody said no.
Rick?
Well, I think we can see from the presentation that it's remarkable where we stand today, given the fact that we've had 5 or 6 years of dramatic decreases in your budget. And I think it should be obvious to anybody that's been paying any attention over the last hour that we certainly need to do something to increase both areas that we've talked about tonight. And this brings up the point when you talked about the 6 officers that you wanted to increase in addition to whatever you would normally see each year. That goes a long way to explain why sunsetting something like this is not practical, because we've got to be able to depend on that funding to continue down the road. We know that we could be hit by another recession anytime, and we'll have to deal with that like we dealt with the last one, and which we would do. But to tie our hands unnecessarily, I think, is the wrong way to approach this. We need to give ourselves this momentum and move forward. We need to catch up where we've lost footing and continue to grow this town. I think Norm's done a fantastic job in keeping the streets as good as they are right now. But I know that's been a tremendous amount of work. The police department, I think, I've said many times, is doing a tremendous job. I know the job is hard, and I know everybody does the best they can, and you've done a great job. But now we need to do our job and support your effort. So I'm here to help you do that. Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, I wanted to say I appreciate both presentations. I think it gives us a lot of things to think about, and they are important, significant in terms of trends. What I think is important to me is that when we went through our budgeting process last year, I think, to me anyway, these were probably the 2 priorities I had in mind when we looked at what can we do to really, as we talked about already, catch up from where we were in 2007, and I think we're still on that process of trying to catch up, and that's, I think, very telling that we're depending on, during a depression, less to do more. And as we grow and we see our population grow and the needs in terms of crime and expanding our infrastructure, I think we'll have to look at how we deal with that, and this, I feel, is probably the best time to do that. So, I think I've always thought we've done a great job in terms of grants and other ways to fund things that we couldn't otherwise. But, I think it's pretty obvious that the federal government and the state are not going to be there for us in the future in order to depend on those. So we do have to, I think, take responsibility, and that's where the council comes into play. Is we have a responsibility to ensure that our community has safety and welfare at the highest point we can provide, both police as well as infrastructure. So I'm going to consider these very seriously. So I do appreciate the presentations.
Steve? No comments?
Mayor, may I just...
Yes, by all means.
And just to respond to everyone here, we at the police department are extremely appreciative of our council and our community and the support that we have. And I also want to say thanks to our staff. Christy and a lot of our people put a lot of effort into preparing this presentation, but on a bigger level, through this recession, people worked really hard to keep this community safe. We're going to continue doing that regardless. And so again, thank you very much.
The way I see it, things have changed. Our roads, used to be dirt road. The only control was a stop sign at the intersections. Today we have, signal lights for one thing, $250,000 to $750,000 job. We're going to be needing wider roads. There's no walking room on our roads. The old chip seal, they're getting rough on the edges and rough around. police services, I can just imagine you sitting in a little car with all kinds of equipment. You hardly have room to wiggle, so you need a bigger car. You need body cameras. Pensions are going to be a huge cost. So things are changing, and we have to keep up with that. I think the truth is that our Public Works Department has done a good job. Our police department is doing a good job. And it just looks like, in view of the changes, we've got to change along with it. As there comes a time, we've been elected to make decisions, and I think we're going to be making that decision. Any other comments, anyone? Is it okay now if, when are you going to bring this back to us, Bill, in a week?
Mr. Mayor, that is certainly your call. We're prepared to bring it back for your consideration whenever you direct us to do that. And I'd also like to add my thanks to Bill, Norm, and James, and Brian Gerald, and the whole department. Everybody did a really good job working on this, but also recognizing all of the departments, because going back to April and May, all of the departments came here, did a presentation showing what their ideas are and what their needs are over the next 5 years. But it was important, we thought, to go ahead and distill that down to 2 priorities and go ahead and come up with something that is workable for the community, or at least from the staff's perspective, workable for the community. So at your direction, we will bring this back for your consideration.
What's your feeling, Rick?
Well, I was just going to touch on one thing when Larry mentioned that about all the other departments, because we kind of glossed over that tonight. But they spent a lot of time coming before us during that 2 months explaining to us the fact that they're in the same position that these other 2 departments are. And, you know, we are going to put some of the money towards that. And they do need the increase. Our HR department explained the fact that each of those departments will need extra help. As our town grows, we need the services. We've got to provide the services to the citizens. That's our responsibility as town leadership, and this plan will let us do that in the future.
Laura?
Along with that, when you bring this back to us, I would like some information about how we're going to address those issues and some outline of a plan. I don't want it nebulous going out there into the future. I mean, we've heard very succinctly and eloquently tonight of 2 of our highest priorities. But as Rick pointed out, we have multiple priorities. So I definitely don't want it left loose out in the ether about how we might organize for other departments in the future. I want some kind of an outline.
Okay, we can certainly prepare an outline, although what it's going to resemble is the 5-year capital program and the 5-year operational program that we've already presented. We will bring that back. I certainly will do that. And it's important to understand that as we move forward, taking the cue from what you have said in our retreats, number 1, roads. We've got to get those things taken care of so we don't cost ourselves additional money by not maintaining them. Number 2, public safety. Okay, those are the 2 focuses. Very conceptually, year 1, $2 million of the $3 million additional that would be generated goes to streets. And then 750 would end up going to the police department. The remaining 250 would be at your discretion to assist with those things that were identified by the other departments, because they are going to need some additional assistance. But the lion's share are the 2 priorities, and we also wanted to retain a great deal of flexibility to have you make those decisions going forward. So let's say, for example, in year 3, you wanted to go ahead and add a couple of lanes to one of the street routes. Then you would have that ability to move that around. So, but we will bring you an outline next Thursday if that is your desire.
Right, because there's that amount of money not accounted for.
Absolutely, and we can go ahead and put together exactly what you would want to do. Would you want it for year one and leave the out years flexible, or would you like an outline for 5 years? We can do whatever you want.
I don't want anything in stone because everything changes.
That's the point, yes. Is to give you flexibility in your annual retreat, to put it where it is most needed, I think has a great deal of wisdom.
Well, that was just going to be my comment. We have a November retreat, and I think that's the point where we would probably decide where we'd like to see that go, because I know there's probably some arts and culture money that would like to be spent somewhere. So I think we could probably assuade Councilwoman Nye at that point.
Does he ever know me, or does he know me?
Really pushing it there, Rick. Mike, any comment? No. Steve? Marty?
Well, I know from past discussions, I mean, I only moved here in 2009, so I really didn't see the recession really affect the town from 2007 to 2009. But when I got here, it was, significant and based on numbers that I've seen. But one of the departments that you told me was the most severely hit during the recession was Parks and Rec. So I think some of the money should be considered for that, as well as, arts and culture. And so we have some serious things to consider as far as where the extra money goes, and even just save it and hold it for a second year so we could do a larger major project. So sometimes holding the money will be better and use more of it for the second year or third year so that we could do a bigger, better project.
And once again, we rely on mayor and council to make those decisions as the elected officials and the policymakers. That's why we have the annual retreat. So you direct us as to what your priorities are, and we're trying to respond to what you have identified as your two main priorities for the last 7 years. And I believe we've hit the nail on the head with what you've seen tonight. But I think that to your point, Councilmember Grossman, the easiest way to describe this need is 2007, $111 million budget. 2015, $72 million budget. Okay, do the math. Take a look at how much of a reduction we have had in our annual budget, and we still are providing services at an extremely high level, but we're starting to need to pay the piper, i.e. street maintenance and public safety. But just that study alone of our high budget and where we are today, and $3 million increase in revenue through a half a cent increase is quite frankly a drop in the total bucket of the revenue picture, but we can do great things with that little drop in the bucket.
I, like Laura, have heard from the community and suggested it, told them we're really concerned about this issue. And so far, every single person I've talked to has been positive. Obviously, not too many people like tax increase. It's not a real big deal. A $1,000 purchase will yield $5 in tax.
Yes. So, Mayor, am I hearing the people on the
I think
dais,
everybody's agreeable.
To bring it back Thursday?
Bring it back. Everybody agreeable?
Okay, thank you very much for your consideration.
There'll be no more discussion. Anybody? If not, meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming.